I wanted to talk about really understanding the hierarchy of evidence. It's incredibly important, especially right now in what we're going through. I recently did a review of literature in which I outlined the highest quality that I could find, that I consulted other PhDs to make sure I found everything. And I reviewed it, listed the results, listed the statistics and the statistical results. And I still have people, after reading dozens of randomized controlled trials, meta-analyses, and systematic reviews, still seem to think that a weak observational study or a cohort study over here, somehow enough to then instruct the entire world to take a medical intervention. Now, I just want to paint an analogy for you. So, as a holistic doctor myself, if I started telling everybody and going on TV as an expert, and I'll talk about expert status and why that really is insignificant to this current topic at hand in science in general. But if you can imagine, I go on TV and I start telling people that, influenza's up, sickness is up, and people need to start eating 5 apples a day. And doesn't matter who you are, you got to eat 5 apples a day. I don't care. And, really young kids, under 9 or so, under 10, they don't have to worry about it. But everybody else, doesn't matter if you're allergic. It doesn't matter if you have an aversion to apples. It doesn't matter. Everybody's got to eat 5 apples a day. Of course, someone's going to say, well, where's your evidence that this actually will help? Let's see the evidence. And if there were, 12, 15 high quality studies concluding that eating 5 apples a day actually is not beneficial. In fact, it's not efficacious. It has no statistical significance in helping lower sickness. And we had that evidence there, but I kept saying, but wait, I have this observational study and I have this cohort study. And I just kept pushing it and pushing it and pushing it, saying, no, but 5 apples actually do help stop transmission of sickness in the community. People would laugh at me. The whole entire scientific community at me, because everybody in the scientific community, whether they're a talking head on TV, or whether they just are writing articles, or whether they have no affiliation whatsoever and they're just giving their own opinion based on the science that they read. These people would literally say, what is this lady talking about? The majority of the science, of the high quality science, the randomized controlled trials, the systematic reviews, and the meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials, almost all exclusively, if not all exclusively, come to the same conclusion that eating 5 apples a day does not stop transmission. That's where we're at with this mask business. That's where we're at. So when people say, listen to the experts, the experts are saying this, you got to then ask, what is the value of an expert opinion? 1, expert opinion can be bought out. 2, expert opinion really has no validity when it comes to quality scientific consideration. So for people who keep saying that, they are actually not pro-science. They're pro just listening to somebody who's repeatedly on TV. That's a huge problem in the scientific community. And multiple scientists speak out about this. Now, I have spent literally hundreds of hours putting together the review of literature and cross-referencing myself, cross-referencing or the studies, and really making sure that I'm looking at every piece of evidence and data that we have on masks, consulting other PhDs and medical doctors to do so. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. So here's a hierarchy of evidence. This is common knowledge of anyone in the scientific community. Now, I just want to say I'm not a PhD, but I definitely am trained in how to read research. I did my own literature review back when I was getting my doctorate, and I do know how to read science, but I'm not a PhD, which is why I consulted PhDs to put this together. But anyway, the hierarchy of evidence here, expert opinion, as you can see, is at the very bottom. It means next to nil. It is so highly prone to biases. So it's not something that we would want to base a whole entire worldwide policy off of is some expert getting up and saying, this is my opinion. This is what I think. We have to go based on actual data if we are going to go down that route of using science-informed policy. So you can see expert opinions at the bottom. Then we have case control studies. These are all non-randomized trials. These are all non-randomized studies. So case control studies, cross-sectional studies, case series, cohort studies, all of these observational studies are very low on the totem pole of strength and quality. Not to say they have no place in a scientific evolution, of course they do, but they are definitely not strong enough to determine policy, because the gold standard here are these right up here. They always have been randomized controlled trials, and then systematic reviews and meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials preferably. So that's the strongest data we have on any topic. So the first place you would look are for these things. Okay, what do these things tell me? And that is going to really inform what we should do. Science is not everything, but it can help give us direction based on one topic at hand, especially if we're talking about policies or, suggestions to give people. Again, the same analogy would be, hey, you should eat 5 apples a day. And I have all these studies down here in this low quality section to prove that I'm correct. And then you'd have a bunch of other people saying, but wait, no, we actually have RCTs. We actually have meta-analyses showing that there's no statistical significance in those who eat apples who do not. This is what we always have to bring into our understanding when we go and look at studies. Okay, what kind of study is it? Is it an RCT? Do we even have RCTs? And the answer is yes, we have plenty of RCTs on mask versus no mask. And in virus transmission, we also have RCTs on just bacterial transmission, which is also interesting too, because bacterial infection or spread has been thought to be dampened with using masks. But even the latest RCTs on that has put that up for debate. But we're talking about virus transmission and the intervention of using masks. So we'll get into that. Again, here we are, the expert opinion. Large bias here. It's not something to hang your hat on. It's not something to just believe just because someone is a talking head talking about this. And I just want to also mention something about cherry picking, because people accused me, a few people, that I was cherry picking. It's like, I'm not cherry picking. I'm just presenting systematic review after meta-analysis, after randomized controlled trial. How am I cherry picking? Because I didn't include the meta-analysis that involved nothing but observational studies. That would be cherry picking. If you start to say none of the 15 studies that indicate that masks actually are ineffective, I don't want to talk about any of that. I just want to talk about this one review of all observational week studies that says they could be effective. That's cherry picking, not the fact that I'm presenting all the highest level, every last one of the highest level randomized controlled trials, meta-analysis, systematic reviews that we have. And this is a medical doctor who is works for the British Medical Journal, and he said politicians and governments are suppressing science. So again, not my opinion. This is the opinion of literally thousands of medical doctors and PhDs who are not affiliated with the centralized effort that is what all these restrictions are. He says they do so in the public interest, they say, to accelerate availability of diagnostics and treatments. They do so to support innovation, to bring products to market at unprecedented speed. Both of these reasons are partly plausible, okay? The greatest deceptions, though, are found in a grain of truth, but the underlying behavior is troubling. So even this medical doctor, among many, many others, thousands of others, have said the same thing. We have multiple quality studies on masks, and they show they are not effective. Why are we still pushing this? Okay, these people's voices are minimized, and only the voices that keep insisting that an observational study is somehow enough to completely put an intervention on an entire world, only those voices are heard, broadcasted, and repeated ad nauseum. One of the studies that a few people send to me and say, but what about this? You didn't include this. Well, I actually reviewed this in detail, and I didn't include it in my review literature because it's absolutely not appropriate. And I'll tell you why. So this one is called The Efficacy of Face Masking Preventing Respiratory Virus Transmission, a Systematic Review Meta-Analysis. So on the front, we're thinking, oh, great, a systematic review, a meta-analysis. She just said that that's top quality. Wonderful. So let's dig in. And this is May 2020. So it's this year. It's a recent review. So wonderful. So far, we're looking good. So the first thing I just want to point out about this one, I mean, there's many issues with this one, but the first thing I want to point out is that there were 21 studies, okay, a total of 21 studies. And as I said, the cohort studies, the case control studies, all these are really low on the totem pole of quality. They literally only used 6 randomized control trials. All the rest, 15 of the rest, are the low quality studies. So you can already see how they've stacked it here. So you have a large portion, the large majority of the studies they reviewed are the low quality studies. And you have a small portion, a smaller portion, that are the RCTs, that are the highest quality. So let's take a look at all of the studies they review. So here's all the 21. You can see they're all here. This is straight from their review. And I want to go through this list. This is what it takes. I'm telling you, people, and it's unfortunate, the common person, the common public who has really no interest in really understanding science, they really just have an interest of extracting just some conclusion that someone says about a study versus actually getting in there and looking at the data. You will often find, and this is kind of something you have to be aware of whenever you're looking at science, is that the conclusion will often just say, masks may prevent the spread of influenza or may reduce ILI, which means influenza-like illness, which is just a clinical diagnosis, not a laboratory diagnosis. And you might see that and you're like, oh, well, that's all I need to know. But whenever you look at the results, you'll see, oh, but there was no statistical significance. There was no statistically significant difference between the control and the mask group. It's like, oh, wait, why didn't they put that in the conclusion? I don't know why they didn't put that in the conclusion. That was in the results. But in the conclusion, they just say, oh, it could help. Well, further investigation, you see, oh, in fact, there was no difference between the two arms. So I'm going to breeze over all these low quality studies. And remember, we're looking for the high quality randomized controlled trials. That's what we want to know. We want to know, gold standard studies here. Whenever you're talking about policy grade evidence, you would never use low grade evidence to advise policy. So case control, all these case control studies. Here we are, cluster randomized trial, so an RCT. I've thoroughly looked at this particular study. There was no significant difference in outcomes between the N95 mask arms with and without fit testing. So this was just measuring how effective N95 is at limiting the spread of respiratory virus. And they found whether you fit it, whether you don't, there was no statistical difference there. Okay, great. Whenever we look at this one, this is a randomized controlled trial. This was in a community setting. Laboratory results did not show any difference between the mask group and the control group. Okay, so 2 out of their 6 RCTs are saying there is no difference between these 2 interventions, control and mask. Cohort study, case control, weak studies. Here we are at the randomized trial. Yay. This is from Cowling, 2008. The laboratory-based or clinical secondary attack ratios did not significantly differ across the mask group and control group. Again, 3 out of the 6 RCTs are saying these things do not work. They're not effective as an intervention. We move on, we go down to another RCT. Now this one says hand hygiene and face masks seem to prevent household transmission of influenza when implemented within 36 hours of the patient symptom. So now you completely removed the concept that everyone should be wearing these. It says right here that the only time, and this study actually looked at other parts, not just after symptom onset, the only time face masks and hand hygiene were helpful were within 36 hours of someone having active respiratory symptoms. 4 out of 6 of the RCTs, again, showing that face masks are not an effective tool to use, widespread, and seems the only time it would be even halfway appropriate if it's quickly used within someone having a cough or respiratory symptoms. Here's another one, a randomized controlled trial. The secondary infection in the mask group was significantly lower compared to the control group. Okay, when I see this, I go, okay, let me go ahead and take a look at this particular study since they're talking about secondary infection. So as you can see, this is Suez and others from Germany. Here is that research article. The role of face masks and hand hygiene in the prevention of influenza transmission in households, so this is in households, results from a cluster randomized trial in Berlin. Wonderful. So if you go down here, you will read in the conclusions, I just told you about this. Results suggest that household transmission of influenza can be reduced by the use of NPI, such as face masks and intensified hand hygiene when implemented early and used diligently. Let's see what the results actually dictate here. Now, in a primary intention to treat analysis of all data, the interventions did not lead to statistically significant reductions of SAR in household contacts. However, and this is what they mentioned in the review, only this part, in a secondary analysis among households with full implementation of intervention within 36 hours after symptom onset, the combined participants from the mask and mask hygiene groups had a significantly lower chance of influenza infection compared to controls. So again, we're talking about after symptoms are manifested and within a very short period of time. Not forever, not when you're asymptomatic, not when you don't have respiratory symptoms. Literally when you have active clinical symptoms, does this seem to be something to consider? But none of the other interventions at different times led to any difference in reductions of the transmission. So we've had 4 out of 6 that showed no significant difference. This one that we just looked at, the German study, showed no significant difference, except if implemented within a short period of time, within several hours of time of actually having active symptoms. Now we'll go to the last one here. Face masks and hand hygiene combined may reduce the rate of ILL, which is influenza-like illness, and it's a clinical diagnosis. It's not a laboratory diagnosis, but it says and also confirmed influenza. So that means a laboratory test in community settings. So let's take a look at this particular study done in 2012 in the USA. And it's this one. Face masks, hand hygiene, and influenza among young adults, a randomized interventional trial. So if we go down, we start looking, we also observed a substantial 43% reduction in incidence of influenza infection in the face mask and hand hygiene group compared to the control. Awesome. But this estimate was not statistically significant. That's what you need. There was no substantial reductions in ILI, influenza-like illness, or laboratory confirmed influenza in the face mask only group compared to the control. So there was no difference in reduction of clinical symptoms that are diagnosed clinically, nor was there differences in the laboratory confirmed flu with just the face mask versus the control group. Okay, so I think we covered them all in this. Yeah, all the rest are case control cohort. All these are low studies. So we just showed literally 6 out of the 6 randomized control trials of this study that people keep sending me as some evidence shows that overall there is no statistical difference using asymptomatic people or people who are not showing symptoms. Mask and hand hygiene versus control, they're not any different of outcomes. And the only thing that a couple of them indicated and referenced is that perhaps after there was some statistical difference after some active clinically significant symptoms, masking could and hand hygiene could be of benefit. But overall, there was no statistical difference. And that was all of the randomized controlled trials. And actually 4 out of 6 showed no difference at all. Only the 2 referenced that 36-hour window of after symptom onset. That's why this study actually supports the case that masks are not effective. But it's often very confusing to people for the reasons I already mentioned, because they'll think, oh, it has all these studies, and in the conclusion it says masks can be helpful. But whenever you start digging, you'll see not so much, if only it were that easy. And again, the observational studies just not strong enough to dictate policy, not at all. Now the next one, this is another review, okay, systematic review in the BMJ, physical interventions to interrupt or reduce the spread of respiratory viruses, a systematic review. And whenever you start looking at this, you'll again see the same issue as with the last one. There's a gob of observational low quality studies and a handful, actually really old randomized control trials. And even in their own description here, they mentioned that the quality is not great, okay, that's a whole nother topic. But I want to get down here and show you the randomized trials that they in fact did use. You can see some of these randomized control trials that they did use. So without digging, you would assume, because in their conclusion of this systematic review, masks work, you would conclude, oh, and they use randomized controlled trials in there, oh, this must be accurate, or this must mean that I should go ahead and just continue to wear my mask even though I have no active symptoms. If you start looking at this, you'll see interventions versus comparisons, painting of hands with iodine versus placebo. That's what they tested. Turner's RCT, use of salicylic acid, okay, versus placebo as a skin cleanser. That's what they tested. Training session with washing hand, cleaning toys, opening windows, so hygiene. That's what they tested. Use of virucidal tissues, okay, versus placebo tissues. That was what they tested. So far, no mask has been tested. Hand washing, that's what they tested. Alcohol-based hand sanitizer, that's what they tested. And by the way, no significant reduction. I've seen that repeatedly, that even hand sanitizing doesn't seem to be as effective as we think, but that's not the topic of the video. They looked at educational messages on t-shirts, okay, measured that. Disposable 3-layered virucidal tissues containing a certain chemical versus placebo, okay? This is what they tested. Antibacterial soap is what they tested. Alcohol gel is what they tested. Hand washing is what they tested. Pump activated antiseptic is what they tested. All of the randomized controlled trials in this study, not one tested masking. Okay, that's what I'm just reading directly from what their table 1 says here. So again, people who look at this and they see, oh, wow, masks must work. Probably because some observational studies indicated that they do. But again, they don't have the strength to dictate policy grade medical interventions pushed on the entire public. You got to come up with some strong evidence for that kind of stuff. And that's what this one lacks.